Welcome. My name is Cindy Snyder Dionisio, and I had the pleasure of being the chair for the Pmbok Guide 6th edition. In this presentation, I'm going to walk you through some of the changes from the Pmbok Guide 5th edition to the 6th edition. We'll start by describing updates to the standard, and then I'll move into the guide itself. For the guide, I'll begin with some of the new subjects in the first 3 sections, affectionately called the front end. I'll cover the 4 topics that are at the front of each knowledge area section, and then I'll walk you through some of the new processes and changed processes in the guide. I'll wrap it up by discussing each knowledge area and highlight the significant updates. Before we get started, I want to address why we even updated the 5th edition, because the 5th edition was pretty good. Well, as a member of the American National Standards Institute, PMI has to follow certain requirements for updating its ANSI certified standards. One of those requirements is to review the standard every 5 years and either update it, discontinue it, or leave it as is. The rate of change in the world and in project management continues to accelerate. The Pmbok Guide needs to keep pace with how projects are being managed. But really, projects are how change happens. It is how we improve products and services, innovate and develop new technology, build infrastructure, and generally make the planet a better place. So as a team, we said we wanted to improve the practice of project management around the globe, thereby making a difference for all cultures. Speaking of the team, selecting the team was a really intense process. PMI had over 100 very well-qualified people from around the globe who volunteered to take part in this project. Unfortunately, we could only have 10 committee members for the core committee. Of the 10 core committee members selected, half were PhDs. One of them was the very first PhD in project management. The committee members were from Australia, Israel, the United Kingdom, Spain, Canada, and the United States. The committee was comprised of individuals from many different sectors, including academics, consultants, government employees, and individuals from global corporations. In addition to the core committee, there were over 50 content contributors, approximately 25 subject matter experts, the standards mag, the consensus body, as well as several hundred practitioners who participated in the public exposure draft review. Unbeknownst to most people, the Pmbok Guide is not the standard for project management. In the 5th edition, there was an annex. That annex was the standard, so that is where we started our work. The Standard for Project Management is an American National Standard Institute standard. That means that it requires a very formal review process by subject matter experts. It also requires a public exposure draft and that all comments be formally reviewed. Commenters can appeal the decisions and all appeals are adjudicated. The Standards Member Advisory Group participates in that appeals review. After all that, the consensus body votes on whether to approve the standard. Section 1 of the standard introduces the roles of project management, some key concepts, and describes the process groups. Section 2 of the standard presents the processes in each process group. It provides a description, the key benefits, the type of process, and the inputs and outputs. Those of you who have been around a while may be asking yourself, what do you mean, type of process? During the course of reviewing the comments from the exposure draft, it became clear that there are different types of processes. While this may seem self-evident, we felt it added to the understanding to remind people that some processes are ongoing, some are done at specific points, and some are done on an as-needed basis. So we came up with these descriptions for 3 different types of processes. For processes used once or at predefined points in the project, think of developing the project charter and closing the project or phase. For processes that are performed periodically as needed, you can consider acquiring resources. That is performed when resources are needed. Conducting procurements is performed prior to needing the procured item. Processes that are done continuously throughout the project. Defining activities can occur throughout the project lifecycle, especially when the project uses rolling wave planning or an adaptive development approach. Many of the monitoring and control processes are ongoing from the start of the project until it is closed out. As you may recall, in previous editions we listed each element of the project management plan that was an input and each element of the project management plan that was updated as an output. We also listed each individual project document that was an input or updated as an output. In the 6th edition, we really wanted to emphasize the need to tailor the project management plan components and the project documents to the needs of the project. So rather than include an ever-expanding list of inputs and outputs, we stated that the needs of the project determine which components of the project management plan and which project documents are necessary. So the input is the project management plan and project documents. That way you select those elements that meet your needs. Now don't worry, we still provide a list of examples under the inputs and output tables. There are examples of the project management plan components and the project documents that are inputs. There are also examples of project management plan components that are updated along with the project documents that are likely to get updated as a result of the process. Here's an example of what you will see. Notice the PM plan and project documents are listed as overarching inputs. And also notice that we say the needs of the project determine which components of the project management plan and which project documents are needed. For those who want more guidance, we list examples of the components of the PM plan that could be included. Same with the project documents. Because the standard is the foundation, it should not have very much change going forward. We wanted to present a structure that could remain relatively stable. Since the standard encourages tailoring of the individual elements based on the needs of the project, it can remain mostly stable. You can see by these statements that occur throughout the standard that it's all about tailoring. One of the critical points we are trying to impart in this edition is that the standard and the guide are not cookbooks on how to manage a project. They just present information. It is the project manager and their team who should be deciding the appropriate components for the project management plan and how robust it should be. The project manager and the team should also identify the project documents they will need to effectively manage the project. Now let's move on to the front end of the Pmbok guide. The front end is sections 1 through 3. It covers key project management principles and broad concepts. It is not an ANSI standard, so there was no formal exposure draft required. However, we chose to expose it and adjudicate all the comments anyway. We reviewed all the comments from all 13 sections of the Pmbok guide. However, we did not provide a notification of the final disposition of those recommendations. Much of the information in the front end is similar to the 5th edition. However, we did include more information on governance and some other new topics. The new Section 3, in particular, is written in less standardese and more approachable language. It showed that there was a need and want for information on the role of the project manager, but the Pmbok guide is pretty locked into project integration starting at Section 4. So to meet these conflicting needs, we had to restructure the information in the front end and combine the information in sections 1 through 3 from the 5th edition into 2 chapters. Then we put the role of the project manager in Section 3 and also linked PMI's talent triangle to this section. PMI research continues to highlight the need for project managers to apply business skills to projects. PMs have to understand the industry, financial implications, benefits management, and strategy to conduct their jobs effectively. Everyone knows that leadership is critical to project success, but until now the Pmbok guide did not address the role of project manager or leadership. This new section provides information on leadership skills, competencies, and personality characteristics that effective project managers display. Now we move into the knowledge areas, which are sections 4 through 13 of the guide. This is the part of the Pmbok guide that many of us are most familiar with. Content in these sections is based on what is considered to be a good practice on most projects most of the time. Before we started the update, we did some market research and some academic research so we could base the content on evidence, not opinion. We also worked on bringing a consistent approach to the content at the front of each knowledge area section. So you'll see the definition of the knowledge area and a description of the processes and the overall table of the ITTOs just like you're used to. However, you'll also see 4 new subsections: key concepts, trends and emerging practices, tailoring considerations, and considerations for agile and adaptive environments. Key concepts absorb a lot of the information that was in the front of each section in previous editions, such as schedule models, communication models, definitions of risk, and so forth. Trends and emerging practices are where some evolving ideas and concepts in project management are discussed, but they aren't quite ready for mainstream yet. You'll find earned schedule in there, non-event risks, and some other information. Tailoring considerations are topics that you can think about to help tailor your project management plan, to help tailor your project documents, and also your processes. And finally, considerations for agile and adaptive environments. This content was developed by 2 volunteers from the 6th edition with both PMP and ACP certifications, along with 2 practitioners developing the Agile Practice Guide, also with PMP and ACP certifications. While the Pmbok Guide does not cover Agile embedded in the content, it does provide options for integrating some Agile practices into your project. We've already discussed how we use the project management plan and project documents as inputs to the standard. We also started bundling the tools and techniques. One of the things about the Pmbok Guide is that with each successive release, the number of tools and techniques grows. And according to our research, not all of the tools and techniques that were listed were used a whole lot. So we used an affinity diagram to identify the common groupings of tools and techniques. Here's what we came up with. This is not a complete listing of the elements in each group, but it's enough to give you an idea. By comparing the collect requirements process between the 5th and 6th edition, you can see how the 11 tools and techniques are now 7, and yet all the same information is still there. However, by pointing out that there are data gathering techniques, it encourages the reader to say, how can I gather data from my requirements? Or what techniques can I use to analyze the data? I can mind map, but I have other options as well. So the tool group is what you're really using. The tools in the group are suggestions for that type of work. For example, to collect requirements, you need to gather data. There are some suggestions on how to do that, such as brainstorming, interviews, focus groups, and so on. You may have a better idea on the specific ways you should gather data. But the point is, gather some data. Now I'm going to move into changes in the processes. These changes reflect market research and deferred comments from previous editions. They've been validated through review by content committee members, SMEs, the MAG, and exposure draft. We renamed 2 knowledge areas. Project Human Resource Management has been refocused to include physical resources like equipment, material, and supplies, as well as team resources. Project Time Management was renamed Project Schedule Management because we work on controlling our schedule, but we certainly can't control time. Managed Project Knowledge is about making sure that the data, information, and knowledge gained from the project is effectively gathered, managed, and passed on to later phases, other projects, and the organization. The main output from this is a lessons learned register, which you will see as an input to many processes and is updated as a result of many processes. The change here is moving this from the closing process group to the executing process group. That's right, learning from our projects is an ongoing process, not something we do only at the end of the project. We also included a process to control the physical resources and to implement our risk responses, because really, planning risk responses without implementing them is not very useful. The process name changes are mostly reflective of the aim of the process and in some cases the move away from a command and control perspective to a more facilitative and collaborative approach. You can see that communication, risk, and stakeholder engagement are now monitored instead of controlled. Now I'll go over some of the changes in each knowledge area. Some of this information will be repeat information, so I won't spend a whole lot of time on each of these. Starting with integration. Based on deferred comments from the 5th edition and further research, we determined it was time to address knowledge management. As a practice, there's little consistency out there on projects, but there is an agreed upon need that it should be happening on projects. We also moved the administrative closure procurement activities into integration. Based on our research, most project managers don't close procurements. They may validate the work against the statement of work and confirm that the work is correct and complete, but usually someone with expertise in contracts officially closes the contract. Since the 5th edition has come out, business analysis and agile methods have gained even more traction. We acknowledge both of these practices in the scope section. Much of that information is in the front matter of the project scope management section. You can find it in the trends and emerging practices, tailoring, and agile and adaptive practices. There is more reference to agile techniques in project schedule management. In mentioning release planning, sprint backlogs, and burn down charts. However, the section is still more focused on scheduling than on any particular methodology. We also moved the process for estimating resources to project resource management. There was very little in the cost area that changed. For project quality management, we tried to maintain a balance between not being too heavy on the manufacturing process techniques and focusing more on the management of quality. We have a new technique of test planning, which is probably used more than PDPC and activity network diagrams. We still keep important quality techniques such as root cause analysis, but we add to them with techniques such as problem solving and testing and product evaluations. One of the more noticeable changes is the shift from human resource management to resource management. There's been a gap in considering how to estimate physical resources, not just team resources. Plan resource management, estimate resources, and acquire resources cover both physical and team resources. Develop team and manage team focus on the team resources. Control resources focuses on physical resources. Feedback told us that project communications management was too mechanistic. This topic is now much more robust and takes into consideration social computing and social networks, as well as information like political awareness, cultural awareness, and communication skills. Overall, it is more humanistic and more robust. We also distinguish between communication as the sharing of information based on the needs of the project and the requirements of the stakeholders. Then communications, with an S, is the means by which information is shared, either communications activities or communications artifacts. A new executing process group called Implement Risk Responses has been introduced. In previous editions, we've planned risk responses, but there was no place they were implemented. The assumption would be that they were implemented as part of the direct and managed project work, but there was no language stating that. The implementation of risk responses underscores the importance of not just responding to risks on paper, but actually doing something to proactively manage the individual and overall risks. Speaking of overall risk, that's a new concept we're discussing. It includes such things as variability and ambiguity. Overall risk is addressed throughout all the risk management processes. Our research on procurement management indicated that the information was out of date, so this topic got an overhaul. You will still recognize it, but it's much more up to date with the common practices on large procurement projects. Some of the information from the closed procurement process moved to control procurements, and some of it went to closed project or phase. And finally, stakeholder management. This topic has been brought up to the best practice levels. There's more information about how to plan for, engage, and manage that engagement with your stakeholders. The information is both more humanistic and more robust. The appendices got a bit of an update as well. You will notice that only the contributors to the 6th edition are listed. It was getting a bit ridiculous to have pages and pages of names from past editions. We still have the glossary, abbreviations, and index. In this edition, we added some appendices that we hope you'll find useful. We add an appendix that summarizes all the key concepts and one that summarizes the tailoring considerations. We provided a summary of the tools and techniques and put a table in that shows where each is listed in the guide. We also included an appendix that is dedicated to describing how agile, iterative, adaptive, and hybrid techniques relate to the process groups. We hope you find the 6th edition useful. There were hundreds of people who spent thousands of hours working on it. We used research, a robust quality control process, and frequent lessons learned to make this the best product we could. In closing, I would like to mention that the teamwork that went into this product from PMI and the volunteers was exceptional. It was a privilege to work on this. I hope it serves you well.